Morning. This is the second part or part B of the Kudila campaign World Exclusive Diagnosis of Fleet Street. The newspapers published from London from a very right wing, racist, and corrupt London centric politicos standpoint. That has been the case with Fleet Street for decades and going back centuries, even worse. Now, the reason why I say worse is because the impact on the British traditional mainstream press, like the Daily Mail and the Tory Graph, the Boris Graph, and the Daily Suppress, which is the Daily Express, Peter Brooks' Legacy of Lies. Now, these titles, and some no longer in publishing, have been influenced by the direct impact of the UK's membership of international treaties, signatures, declarations, and the milestone, as I have been saying the last few editions, the milestone was marked in December 1948, 10th of December 1948, when the United Nations Organization was formally launched and incorporated in the declarations of the human rights and other rights, were the rights of people targeted and victimized by racism and racists. And the reason for the focus on racism and ethnicity and what later became known as ethnic cleansing when the Serbs began to massacre Muslims in Bosnia and other places during the 1990s. But in the 1940s, the emphasis of the people who put their intellectual contributions into the contents of what became the Universal Declaration for Human Rights with the United Nations Organization, they were immediately and urgently concerned, overwhelmingly concerned, to stop the scourge of racism. Tony Benn, in his recently revived kind of video of a short spiel in 1998 or 99 in the House of Commons, referred to the United Nations as being dedicated to ending scourge of war. But I disagree with Tony Benn because it wasn't war only. It was the war based on racism and the war that was launched, manufactured, invented, and created by the Nazis based on the targeting of people based on their race and religion and ethnicity. And so therefore the United Nations founding principles and aims influenced a series of other declarations and treaties and conventions, especially the 1951 Refugee Convention that had direct enforcing influence on the British state. Now, British state, remember, is still this week kind of celebrated wrongly by the racists on the thesis that racism is good, that racist superiority is good. For example, the Daily Mail in the last 24 hours has literally dug up from retirement or obscurity, one of the BBC's news presenters called Jan Leeming. Jan Leeming was never distinguished as a news presenter of original news or moral news or ethical news or anything that she did was not out of the ordinary, which was the racist pattern. And she didn't introduce an anti-racist perspective, an enlightening perspective. So what the British media, mainstream media, has been doing since 1948 has been looking for excuses, any excuses to avoid having to implement the declarations against racism, the scourge of racism. But the fact that it has been engaged in having to find ways to avoid having to recognize the duty to oppose racism has had a direct effect. And direct effect has been to stop so much racism from appearing in the mainstream. If it wasn't for those declarations and the UK's signatures to the treaties and conventions that followed the declarations of 1948, Britain would have been worse, 10 times worse, 100 times worse than it is now. And the forces of darkness that have been absolutely active, hyperactive since 1948, have never given up their plot to take the country back to the darkness that would resemble the darkness of the Nazis, of Hitler's leadership. And it is not a fantasy word I'm saying, it's not a fantasy kind of analysis or comparison. The Daily Mail itself appeased Hitler and the Nazis in the 1930s, and the Times newspaper. So it's not like I am inventing an interpretation based on some kind of subsequent events. No. It was actually the Times and the Daily Mail, whoever owned the Daily Mail and the Times, it didn't matter. The titles are still in being, and the Times and the Daily Mail have this week been part of the celebration of the racist defiance against the people who criticized the BBC for ages for perpetuating and perpetrating a racist myth at the expense of people of African and Asian origin and background. Rule Britannia. That has been the main reason why there has been a row, and the newspapers have been absolutely agog. And the Daily Mail and the Daily Borisgraph have been leading the field, leading the chant, racist chant against the BBC's ultra kind of anti-racist stance, which is itself a fantasy, because the BBC has not been taking any ultra anti-racist stance. The BBC has been making all kinds of opportunistic compromises in order to suppress its own racist agenda, which is very much active and alive, and also to kind of capitulate to the racists, like the Daily Mail's readers and supporters, and the Daily Borisgraph's readers and supporters, and the likes of Boris Johnson himself, who want to exploit, absolutely irresponsibly and brazenly and callously exploit the last available opportunity, racist opportunity that they can, in order to either seek to get into office or stay in office, which is the case now with Boris Johnson. Now, the 4 items that we have been kind of focusing on in examining, diagnosing the Fleet Street behavior in the last week, let's say, have been the pandemic and the housing crisis in Britain, the PAG being the so-called extension to the ban on eviction proceedings in court. And with that is the housing crisis, of course. And then the migrants, refugees, invasion of Britain. 23 people have been kind of targeted by Priti Patel to be deported to Spain. These are not Spanish people. These are people from Africa and Asia, the refugees. And the reason why they have been targeted to be flown to Spain is because they, on their way to Britain, they passed through Spain. So what they're doing, and Priti Patel is fronting the racists at the British Interior Ministry, that is the Home Office. They're accusing all these countries like Spain and France and Germany, regardless of the very kind of harsh racist atmosphere they have created in those countries themselves. But in the context of the refugees who are currently in the UK, or asylum applicants who are currently in the UK, the stunt and the war-like situation and the rhetoric that have been created by Priti Patel doing the job for Boris Johnson is actually based on the assumption that these asylum seekers or refugees are not the responsibility of the UK. And that is exactly what they are doing in violating the obligations under the United Nations membership, United Nations Charter, United Nations declarations, and other treaties that followed the UK's membership of the United Nations, or the United Nations existence, since December 1948. And the United Nations itself has been publishing data all this week about the numbers of people who are actually in a class or category or group of being migrants from Africa and Asia. There are, according to them, there are about 26 million people who are refugees, or 50 million, depending on how many particular kind of statistical surveys are being included or excluded at the time. But the basic bottom line is that the total number of refugees or people being homeless or stateless or seeking refuges runs into tens of millions at any given time. And this takes this commentary back to what I said in January 1992 on Channel 4 slot news, Channel 4 news slot that I had written and presented and addressed it to the United Nations in 1992. I addressed the United Nations, and I particularly addressed it through the role of the UK at the time, which was the chair or the president of the session. And John Major, being the prime minister at the time in post, was on his way in a day, or on the day that I wrote and presented that program, slot on Channel 4 News. And my thesis was that the emphasis at that time, John Major was echoing the American line that some countries, their target was Iran and probably Pakistan and North Korea, whatever. Their target was that countries like Iran and Pakistan, or Muslim countries, should not be allowed to have access to nuclear weapons or nuclear powers. Now, that is absolutely part of the universal aim that I support, that denuclearization, the nuclear power should be scrapped and decommissioned, and all the weapons that exist in the world that could destroy the world a billion times. So they need to be decreased and eliminated, not increased. So I support that. But the practical problem is that the line that says that Iran and Pakistan should not have nuclear weapons, or Korea, leaves out some other countries that don't even mention that have nuclear weapons. And that is why it is a dishonest line and agenda which will not ever be implemented, because the people who they're targeting for disarmament know that these particular countries have this, and the British and the Americans and the Russians are not talking about it. So what is happening in the practical world is that nuclear weapons remain the same, and nobody is stopping them, nobody is decommissioning them. So even if they said some more slogans about ending nuclear weapons, it won't be ended, because there is no agreement, there is no narrative, there is no actual emergency discussion going on for stopping nuclear weapons in the world, including Pakistan and Iran and other countries. So what can be done is to resolve this humanitarian crisis in the meantime, while the world still is in one piece, if you like, and not destroyed by nuclear explosions. Like Josh Swinson and Ed Davey. Ed Davey has just been re-elected leader of the UK Lib Dems party. So Josh Swinson and Ed Davey, appearing on Channel 4 News just before the last leadership stunt, were speaking to Kathy Newman, one of the main presenters and news reporters on Channel 4 News. And Kathy Newman is absolutely like Jan Leeming, totally devoid of any sense, any rationality. And she asked them, both of them, if they would press the nuclear button. And they said yes. And the speed with which both of them said yes was astonishing. There was no hesitation. There was no kind of need to think about it. Nuclear weapons. Kathy Newman did have no right, no reason to ask that question, because there is no obligation on a news reporter, news presenter, or interviewer on a news program to ask likely leaders of any political party, no matter how numerically insignificant that party is, whether they would press the nuclear button. The narrative agenda should be to discourage use of nuclear weapons, or to ask that question after a long introduction about the perils of having nuclear weapons in the world and the threat having the nuclear weapons poses to the planet, all of humanity, no matter what race, religion, faith, whatever, the entire planet is in peril. And yet, Kathy Newman, who incidentally is touted as one of the better reporters and presenters in Channel 4 News, I have to see the evidence as to why she is rated so well. And we shall be continuing on the theme of Kathy Newman and the role of others on Channel 4 News, BBC News, Sky News, ITV News, and other mainstream outlets. In the meantime, we come back to the question of the media talking about racism and racist attacks on the migrants, and there is no evidence that the Fleet Street papers of today, Friday the 28th of October 2020, are any more willing to allow the universal declarations of the United Nations and the Migrants Refugees Convention of 1951 to be implemented by the British government, whatever political party or collection that is. And what they are saying, the Sun has got on page 16, student migrant shocker, Chinese fuel huge rise. Now that is a treble-barreled, idiotic headline, because no matter how many Chinese are coming, Boris Johnson has declared openly a criminally contradictory passage for Hong Kong, anti-Chinese Hong Kong protesters to come to Britain, as many as 3 million. Now, there is no way that even 1 million migrants from Africa and Asia would reach Britain in the next 200 years. But Boris Johnson, in one stroke, he has said that he will give British citizenship to 3 million Hong Kong anti-Chinese protesters and anti-Chinese interests and whatever. So they're saying the student migrant shocker, Chinese fuel huge rise. Students from China and India have sent net migration shock rocketing to its highest level since the 2016 referendum. That's the political editor, Harry Cole. Harry Cole is not a political editor. Harry Cole is as grotesque and ignorant as any scum. That is the Sun that I call it scum because of its complete, absolute gutter level of so-called journalism. And it's dirty digger scum. Dirty digger is Rupert Murdoch, as described by the Private Eye magazine. So they are actually understating what Boris Johnson has done about the number of migrants being allowed here. So it's completely corrupt and criminal, because 23 migrants that came from Spain are being returned to Spain. And guess what? Not in a dinghy or dinghies, but in a plane chartered by the Interior Ministry, fronted by the daughter of migrants, Priti Patel. Now, where would she be if her parents were refused refuge or asylum in this country when they came in the 70s? Where would she be? She would not be born in Britain, would she? So that is the actual evidence of the racism and the criminal conception of racist lies by the scum and the rest of Fleet Street. They are talking about 23 migrants. And the Sun Online has said that the lawyers, the solicitors, have actually scuppered, that is, frustrated Priti Patel's attempt to send these 23 migrants to Spain. What is 23 migrants to 3 million Hong Kong anti-Chinese persons being openly welcomed by Boris Johnson? And he is not being held to account for this grotesque criminality, as has he not been held to account for the grotesque abuse in putting into the House of Peers, that is called the House of, quote, Lords, by the corrupt kind of narrative language that is used. Nobody has held him to account for the abuse and putting all these rogues and criminals in the House of Peers. Whereas in the 1970s, Harold Wilson, the then Labour Prime Minister, was pilloried, ridiculed, condemned, and demonized for allegedly accepting a list of names to be put in the House of Peers. And the list was connected with his then political advisor or long-standing political advisor, a woman called Marcia Falklander. And the private eye calls her Fort Bender or something. Now, the reason was that she influenced the list. It is absolutely clear that Boris Johnson has been influenced by any number of people, including his current fiancée and girlfriend or whatever. But nobody is raising the questions. And that is the sickness at the heart of Fleet Street. They think that Boris Johnson is above accountability and that he has got a kind of license, impunity from accountability, just like his main boss, Dominic Cummings, has, because Cummings and Johnson's family members were breaking the rules about lockdown, while the rest of the country was being asked to observe the rules or face consequences. So this is a kind of darkness already, darkness being operated by the Fleet Street newspaper, so-called, and the one the BBC broadcasts to the world, British press, independent, and all the rest of it. People should take note of this evidence that I'm making available here. And this today's papers cost about £16, £17. So £17 in the exchange rate in the subcontinent in Africa. Just see how much money this program is spending in order to bring to you this fresh, actual access to the evidence, not fresh as in truth or something. Now, this I have read in the previous edition, this front page, which was only visible the front page in the Sky News kind of online insertion of the front page. But this is the one that I can actually read from because it is clearly legible, but online it is less easy to read all this stuff now. The Times is saying that lawyers have scuppered Patel's bid to put channel migrants in Spain. Now, this whole headline is absolute lies, illegal, corrupt, false, misleading, and intended to mislead the readers and also put a false record. Now, legal editor is called Jonathan Ames, A-M-E-S. And there are three of them writing this piece. Richard Ford, home correspondent, and Jonathan Ames, legal editor, and Stephen Swinford. Now, these three have written the piece or contributed to it, but who wrote that headline is not necessarily clear. One of them might have written it, or more likely, a sub-editor might have written it. Whoever wrote it made a criminal error or criminally false statement because lawyers did not scupper Patel's bid to put channel migrants in Spain, because for a start, it was Britain's legal obligation to allow the migrants to be duly and urgently processed over their applications. So the lawyers were not introducing an element that didn't exist. The duty was already upon the British Interior Ministry, the Home Office, to allow migrants and to allow their application to be processed properly, according to the charter, according to the declarations, according to the treaties, and according to the agreements that Britain has been signing all these years. Now remember, most of the migration crises that exists in the African continent and in the Asian continent are directly linked to the additional desperation created by the wars that Britain, France, Germany, America have been waging and creating in those continents under any kind of pretext. So the migration has been caused by these people in power, in addition to the causes that were linked with the poverty and hunger, and the reason being that the vast natural resources in Africa and Asia have still been ignored and not being properly used, and the yields and the potential have not been properly cultivated literally. And I said in 1992, in January 1992, that that is the kind of thing. I didn't say it literally, but that is what was involved in the 3-minute broadcast that I had written and presented, that the available solutions in Africa and Asia would be the best way to prevent future rush of people seeking refuges in the West, nightmare rush. I said that 28 years ago. And I'm on the record as having said it over the last 28 years, time and time again. And I had said it before. I had said in 1984-85, while I condemned Bob Geldof on his stunt about Live Aid, that he was doing a stunt and he was doing it as an opportunistic career move. And he did that because Geldof has gone quiet, silent about any of this stunt that he was doing in 1984-85, this Ethiopian famine that actually apparently triggered his kind of attention. And I condemned him for this stunt because he did not relate to the people either on the ground in Ethiopia or in Africa or other campaigners. I wasn't mentioning myself, but I am one of the campaigners against poverty. I have been always. I am a leading campaigner against poverty and causes of poverty at every stage. I never heard of Bob Geldof, and he still hasn't contacted me. Not that I'm waiting for him to contact me, but the point is made that if he hasn't contacted me, then who could he have possibly contacted and cooperated with in the overdue fight to really end poverty and hunger at home and at root in the countries in Africa and Asia? So the Times is doing the racist propaganda, illegal propaganda for the racist agenda against the migrants. And it's not contrasting that with the 3 million Chinese, Hong Kong people. They are Chinese origin, Hong Kong people, but politically they're taking a stance against the Chinese. So that is the kind of currency. That is the currency, that is the loyalty, that is the price. They have to oppose China, and that will be rewarded by Britain letting in 3 million Hong Kong people. And there is no connection. In the Times to that. And in the Times, and then inside page 4, is doing another take on the student numbers coming from China and India, boosting migration number in Britain. And the lawyers who allegedly scuppered the Priti Patel racist bid to deport 23 migrants to Spain in a specially chartered flight has got a piece in the continuing on page page 4, it has got a paragraph. A government source said there is a bunch of particularly loud-mouthed lawyers and barristers who seem to spend more time on social media than representing their clients, who think even the mildest criticism of their profession will bring about the destruction of democracy. It's patently absurd, and they would be better off leaving this kind of hysterical ranting to Her Majesty's opposition. Now, there are two lies there. First of all, the lawyers are not hysterical. The lawyers are quite methodical, and they are the ones who are actually benefiting the most from whatever remains of the legal aid. And the suggestion that the hysterical accusations should be coming from the opposition led by Keir Starmer is absolutely pathetic. Because Keir Starmer is not on this planet. He's taken a leave. He's in hibernation. He has fallen asleep on most things, and is not talking about any concern about the migrants. The only concern is that probably Priti Patel is taking too long to oust the migrants or something like that. And again, these are the 2 or 3 topics that even the Times is actually concerned about: the migrants, and the pandemic, where the pandemic is being dismissed by the lobby of big business that want the workers to come in. That is very absurd, isn't it, and significant. Most of the times, the right wing, the Tories, and the big business don't even recognize the existence of people who work in their various factories and machine-like kind of settings, making money for these companies. But now they are missing the workers. So just make the point. And there is a 2-page spread on pages 16 and 17 of the Times today, saying in the headline that UK gave farm £50 million to aid £50 million aid to carry on building unsafe classrooms. So there is the evidence. Even the Times, which is a supporter of the lobby to get Britain working and get the children back to school, it is saying that the government gave 50 million to company to build unsafe classrooms. And there is no prosecution. There is no outrage. There is no scandal. There is no suggestion of corruption. And most certainly there is no suggestion of class war. That is to say that they could make unsafe buildings for classroom for working class children or children from the working class and the poor backgrounds or backgrounds in poverty. And here is a piece about the Stephen Lawrence murder. For a start, the Stephen Lawrence murder is still being investigated. He's 27 years old. Now, this guy who was apparently the source for information that led to the second so-called prosecution of the alleged murderers of Stephen Lawrence is himself being investigated for perjury. So what this shows is that there is no forgiveness for those who actually expose any level of corruption in the police or in the state. They catch up the corrupt perpetrators or their mates and their cabals catch up with the whistleblower, as they have done here. And the official nephew Tom, Trevor Terrible Phillips, has got a piece in the Times, which obviously echoes his masters and mistresses. And he says, Rule Britannia is fine. And he's not impressed by Black Lives protesters. And he says that Britannia rules and it should continue to rule. So you've got an official slave having a column. Official mental slave who has got a column, not campaigners, not people who are investigating corruption at any level in any part of society or government, local or central. And this is why the newspaper, the Fleet Street, is a den of darkness and lies and denials. And the Times, the leading paper, even now internationally, the Times of London is still regarded as the newspaper of record. And the Beaverbrook Daily Express is absolutely, totally not on this planet when it comes to Brexit and hatred of Europe. So it is doing that, and it is full of anti-Europe poison. And there is another plug for Priti Patel. She doesn't come across as upholding the law, protecting a decent and law-abiding society by observing due process or enlightenment. She comes across as a thug. I will crack down on shop staff abuse. I mean, she is threatening to beat up the abusers. So what's different? I mean, the abusers being abused. I mean, how is that any different? So the standard of morality is absolutely absent. There is no morality. And here is Frederick Forsyth talking about a Mickey Mouse degree. So many degrees issued by the British universities are useless. So that raises the question as to why the Chinese and the Indians are apparently coming in such a large number to study so-called British university degrees. There is no clue. There is no reason why there should be, except that Thomas Babington Macaulay and his brainwashing is still working in India. The Indians, at least those ones that never even heard of Macaulay, I think, are keen to become, as Macaulay said, not me, brown-skinned Englishmen. And that's the reason why they're coming, and they're coming to partake of the Mickey Mouse degrees that Frederick Forsyth is condemning, and correctly so. And this Daily Mirror today is supposed to be the paper for the opposition Labour Party, and yet they are obsessed with this footballer, and they are making a kind of live martyr of him, saying that he should not have been arrested by the foreigners. I mean, how dare the foreigners arrest a British criminal on their soil? That is unacceptable. That is the racist assumption. How is it that Harry Maguire says he thought he was being kidnapped in the fracas that led to his court case in Greece. Now, how many victims of racist police behavior can say that in Britain about British police, or for that matter, about the police in America or in Australia or in Canada, which is all these countries are currently witnessing high levels, incidents of racism, racist attacks by the quote authorities. But Harry Maguire thinks that the Greeks don't have any right. I mean, how dare the Greeks arrest him and even consider that he could possibly, a British Englishman. Is it Englishman? Maguire, the name is not English, but he may have been, England star. How dare they even think that an England star could commit a crime? Criminals are only foreigners, and even in their own country. So the Greeks have been put on trial by the British press for daring to arrest this Maguire. This is absolutely typical, and that is why the Daily Mirror is as racist, as corrupt as the Daily Mail and the Daily Star and the Daily Express, and the scum, of course. And they are not helping the people get education. The readers of these titles, these papers, are only getting miseducation, misinformation, and fabrication, and their minds being completely brainwashed. That is what happens. Day in, day out, they are being brainwashed. Now, on page 20 of the Daily Mirror, there is a racist abuse growing on overseas army bases. Racist abuse among troops on Britain's overseas bases has been allowed to grow and fester, it has been claimed. Leading claims lawyer Ahmad Al-Nahas said 60% of the complaints of military racism his firm deals with are troops serving abroad. Now, this is not news. This is something that is there every day, happening every day. It's not growing. It's happening, has been happening every day. And the Daily Mirror should have pointed that out, but it doesn't. The point is that by suppressing the perpetual racism, the Fleet Street is colluding in the continuing cover-up of the racist crimes and criminality, and the denial of human rights, and the violation of the legal obligations that the signatory state Britain has to uphold the rights of the victims of racism and other crimes. Now, this is the exclusive tag they have got on the Guardian piece about COVID-19 death tolls were kept secret to protect care home providers, the businesses. This is what we discussed in the first edition A of the diagnosis of Fleet Street. And that is already done, and that Guardian exclusive has been copied by other outlets, including especially the I newspaper, which we shall look at just after this one. There is this other item on page 5 of the Guardian, talking about Dorset and the Tories trying to fine people sleeping rough. Now that's the Department of Housing, Ministry of Housing, that should stop that. But there is no sign that Robert Jenrick will even acknowledge that the Tories in Dorset have been trying to fine people with who are trying to sleep rough. Now, this is an interesting piece on the front page of The Guardian as well. The headline is interesting, that is, whether the contents are as interesting. Children in UK are the unhappiest in Europe. Now, I have said that in boroughs like Tower Hamlets, Newham, Hackney, in East London, and other boroughs like Southwark and Lambeth, on the southern side of the River Thames, inner London, inner cities, estates, housing estates are controlled by gangs of thugs that dominate the actual territories in the housing estates. And the local councils are allowing the thugs to do that. And this is admission. This is admission that children are in serious kind of neglect by the authorities, by the social services, by the school system, and by other agencies. Now, as the commentary and the diagnostic commentary is based on facts, I'm only giving facts. I'm not giving some hypothesis. This is fact that they have admitting it there. But I have been involved in trying to get Tower Hamlets and Newham and Hackney and other, all the 10 inner London boroughs or the borough councils to do their duties and make sure that the schools behave properly themselves. Now, the evidence of the recent downgrading of the schools results by the government shows that the schools in this country are not as they appear to be. That is to say, the schools are not educating children, not anywhere near the number and the capacity that they should be. So the majority of the children that are schooled, not educated, schooled compared to educated, majority of these children on the rolls are probably being schooled, but they're not getting educated. And Frederick Forsyth's comment, although it appears in the completely poisonous Daily Express, but that is where he gets the money, I think, from. But his comment is that most university degrees are useless. Mickey Mouse degrees or many degrees are useless. So education in this country is not the best in the world because the education is absent. So it cannot be compared as best or good or better. And this is, The Guardian is failing to follow up the own source that gives it the information that children in Britain are the unhappiest in Europe. I will be talking another time about the children that were let down in a school called Ian Mikado School for special needs children. And in that context, I'll be talking about the betrayal of young person and children in serious danger of harm and damage, betrayal that I previously mentioned. Both Lutfur Rahman, as the incumbent at the time in the post of the corrupt post of mayor did, and Lutfur Rahman's successor, John Biggs, has been perpetrating and been party to. Children in Tower Hamlets, large numbers of children in Tower Hamlets are being seriously damaged emotionally, mental health wise, and in terms of the criminality. And there is no accountability at any level, and there is no service to them at any level. And I have been opposing these failures. And in doing that, I have been pointing out the fact that the councillors, elected councillors, and the elected mayors have been letting down the community and committing crimes, serious crimes of neglect and collusion and complicity with the negligent regimes in schools and in the so-called social services, where there is a thing called safeguarding children. Absolutely fantastic name, safeguarding children. But more often than not, these children are not being safeguarded by these personnel who are career social service staff, career. They're not committed, and there is a lot of gaps, and there is a lot of lying, there is a lot of passing the buck and denials going on, and the counselors are not holding these people to account. And as we came to know and find out when we got involved in the then slogan to get rid of Claire Lillis, the head of the Ian Mikado School, for her complicity and collusion with the racist killer of Shibli Rahman. At every level in Tower Hamlets, the councillors are colluding with the racists or the criminals in making decisions to let the racists go. And that includes elected Mayor John Biggs, and that included elected Mayor Lutfur Rahman before that. And despite the slogans heard in June 2016 at the meeting held in Greater X Street at the Micro Business Center, so-called, about needing to get Claire Lillis out of that school, there has been nothing. And the reason why there hasn't been nothing is that Khudila campaign tried to get the campaign on the road, but we could not get the evidence substantiating the allegations that were made at that meeting held in the Micro Business Center. We could not get the evidence even after trying for more than 2 years after that meeting. We had no direct involvement in finding out about the various opportunities given to that killer of Shibli Rahman, the racist killer. But once we got involved and were invited and were assured by certain individuals, including certain parents who said that they knew the evidence, they never gave us the evidence despite asking. We asked them. And in this recording and this program, I'm asking again, anyone who knows of substantiated evidence or substantiable evidence or substantial evidence of racism and dishonesty and corruption, as has been alleged and mouthed about Claire Lillis, they can still contact the Khudila campaign, and we shall do our best at this late stage to take the campaign forward and get her out of that post and get her to pay accountability, to be held to account for her role. Similarly, any person or party or more than one person in the employment of the Tower Hamlets Council who facilitated the rewarding of Ian, the killer of Shibli Rahman, the Devlin person who was one of the 3 killers of, convicted killers of Shibli Rahman. That is the open invitation, updated invitation to anyone who genuinely has genuine, original, substantial evidence of racist behavior and corrupt behavior, criminal behavior by Claire Lillis or her accomplices, is invited to give us the evidence, even at this stage, and we shall apply the evidence and we shall do the necessary in order to clear the school of involvement with these racist or any other racist, other criminals, and The other point is about Shibli Rahman. Certain individuals said when they first spoke to us about Shibli Rahman and their kind of knowledge about his being murdered by racists, that they supported the idea of doing a memorial for Shibli Rahman. That was in 2016 and 2017. So I'm saying here that we shall be helping in any constructive, lawful, ethical, moral, transparent, accountable way. If anyone wants to do a memorial for Shibli Rahman as a memorial to guide children and other people for the future and educate people about the evils of racism and the need to end racist behavior and attitude, and to find anyone who is guilty of racist prejudice, racist behavior, to get them duly, lawfully held to account. So the children in the Ian Mikado school setting are not the only children that are being let down and made unhappy by their environment, but children in the majority of the homes in the inner cities and on the council estates are very unhappy. And as I said before, the local councils and the local authorities and the local politicals and the local so-called leaders of the communities, because these are career leaders, they are the kind of selfie leaders, selfish, self-appointed, and self-feed leaders. All of them are to blame for so many children in the UK being unhappy. And there is no agenda anywhere at the center of the government, in the House of Parliament or Houses of Parliament, that actually takes the responsibility of looking after the children as seriously as it must be taken, and it is not being taken. And the responsibility of looking after the children's mental and human needs actually is not different from the responsibility to the migrant children and migrant applications. So when a government is actually pursuing a warlike strategy to attack and hound applicants for refuge in Britain, hound them back to Europe or back to other countries, there is no way other than the fact that children will be the unhappiest in Britain, because that attitude is not just confined to the migrant children. That is a manifestation of the contempt by Priti Patel and Boris Johnson and his members of his cabal, so-called cabinet. They have no respect for people, and they most certainly have no respect for children. And there is a kind of admission in the Priti Patel Home Office or Interior Ministry that lawyers are vilified as activist lawyers, and the Home Office admits that that is wrong to call lawyers activist lawyers if they are doing their job of representing clients. And I'm saying that with a caveat, with a condition, with a provision, that I am very much referring to the evidence, and that evidence is the fact that it is there in the Guardian, not that I agree with the image of the lawyers otherwise, because I believe that lawyers are licensed law traders. They're in the trade, in the business for money, and not for the principle, not for the ethics and the morality. But having said that, there is a piece where there is an anonymous policeman saying, or policewoman, saying that stop and search, which affects disproportionately is done against black people, Africans and Asians, and it would be better to cut that, stop and search. But that is anonymous, and that is only in the Guardian. It's not the position of the mainstream, the media. And Simon Jenkins, who has got a column in the Guardian, is talking about how the constant U-turns on so many issues show that Boris Johnson is really very weak. So we shall end this part here and continue in part C.